Okay, so let's get right into it. Back in 2009, what looked like a pretty standard divorce case made its way to India's Supreme Court. You had a working wife, an unemployed husband, and what seemed like a simple request to move the trial. But the court's final decision in Ines Miranda versus Santosh K. Swamy, well, it turned into a massive watershed moment. It seriously challenged how people thought about gender roles and set a precedent that's still making waves in Indian family law today.
And this was the headline that just exploded across newspapers, grabbing everyone's attention. I mean, can you imagine? The idea was just shocking to so many people. A wife being told she has to pay for her husband's legal fight against her, it just flipped the script on everything people thought they knew. But, behind that sensational headline was a really human story about two people, two cities, and a court trying to solve a very, very modern problem. So that's the big question we're going to unpack here. How on earth did the Supreme Court land on a decision that on the surface seems so completely backward? To really get it, we first need to meet the couple right at the heart of this whole thing.
All right, so let's meet Ines Miranda and Santosh K. Swamy. Their marriage had fallen apart, and, like a lot of couples in that situation, their lives were just being pulled in totally different directions, not just emotionally, but literally geographically. And wow, when you look at their situations side by side, they couldn't be more different. On one hand, you've got Ines Miranda. She has a job in Bangalore, she's making her own money, and she's looking after their young child. Then you've got her husband, Santosh K. Swamy, living 360 kilometers away in Chennai. He's unemployed and has absolutely no income. So she files for divorce. He, on the other hand, files a case in Chennai for something called restitution of conjugal rights, which is basically a legal way of asking the court to make her come back to the marriage.
So Ines does something that seems totally logical. She goes to the Supreme Court and asks them to move her husband's case from Chennai over to Bangalore, where she lives. Her reasoning was simple, practical, and made a lot of sense.
And this is where the whole thing gets really, really interesting. Because it stopped being about just moving a case from one city to another. It turned into this huge clash between the letter of the law and the cold, hard financial reality these two people were living. And look, Ines's side of the story makes a ton of sense. Trying to travel back and forth to Chennai for court dates, that's a huge burden. It could mess with her job, and it's incredibly tough when you're taking care of a little kid. She figured, hey, my husband's not working, so he has more time and flexibility to travel to Bangalore. Legally, what's called the balance of convenience seemed to be completely on her side.
But Santosh had one single critical problem. He was broke. He had no money. For him, what was convenient for his wife was actually devastating. If the case got moved, he couldn't afford the travel, the food, a place to stay, which meant he couldn't even show up to defend himself. It would basically shut him out of his own case, making any idea of a fair fight impossible.
So what's the legal angle here? What tool did the court have to work with? Well, it's a part of the law called Section 24 of the Hindu Marriage Act. And it's pretty straightforward. It lets a judge order one spouse to pay the other's court-related expenses if they can't afford it themselves. But here's the kicker, the most important part. The law, written way back in 1955, is totally gender neutral. It says it can be applied to either the wife or the husband.
So this whole puzzle lands on the desk of two Supreme Court judges, Justice Delvir Bhandari and Justice A.K. Patnaik. And they had to do this incredible balancing act to find a solution that was actually fair to two people with completely valid but totally opposite problems.
And this is what's so brilliant about their approach. They didn't just pick a side. They didn't say, well, she's right or he's right. The court looked at the situation and said, you know what? Both of these problems are real. The wife's hardship traveling, absolutely legitimate. The husband's inability to pay for that travel, also completely legitimate. They refused to ignore either person's reality. So they came up with this really elegant two-part verdict. It's actually pretty genius. First, they said, okay, we're transferring the case to Bangalore. That solves the wife's practical problem. But, and this is the part that made history, they attached a condition. The transfer only happens if the wife pays for her husband's travel expenses. That completely removes his financial barrier to getting justice. And they didn't just leave it vague. They put a specific number on it, 10,000 rupees. Now, back in 2009, that was seen as a fair amount to cover his travel back and forth from Chennai to Bangalore, plus food and a place to stay. It made sure he could actually be there and participate. And if you look at the actual words from the court order, it's super short, just a couple of paragraphs. But man, does it pack a punch. It's so direct. It just lays it out there. The husband is unemployed, therefore the wife has to pay his travel expenses. Simple as that. No fluff, just a clear, powerful ruling. So why are we still talking about this short order all these years later? Why was it such a big deal? Well, let's get into the incredible legacy of this case, because the court wasn't just solving one couple's problem. It was really setting down a new way of thinking for a changing society. It all boils down to this one powerful idea. Economic reality is more important than gender stereotypes. The court's decision had nothing to do with traditional roles. It wasn't about who was the husband or the wife. Nope. It was simply about who had the paycheck and who didn't, who had the financial power and who was in a vulnerable spot. And that idea was a total game changer. And the ripple effects from this, they've been huge. This case took that gender-neutral language that was already in the law and made it real, made it practical. It created a roadmap for future judges on how to balance someone's convenience with someone else's access to justice. It also officially said that, hey, unemployment makes men vulnerable too. And it even expanded the definition of litigation expenses to include the real-world costs of just getting to the courthouse. And you can actually trace this case's influence right up to today. After that initial media frenzy in 2009, it was used as a reference point all through the 2010s. Just in 2023, its core ideas were brought up in another case involving a working wife. So today, as our families and our economic roles keep changing, the Ines Miranda case is more important than ever. And that really brings us to the final critical question this whole case leaves us with. It proved that our laws can look past gender and focus on what's fair and what's financially real. And it forces us all to ask, as our society keeps moving forward, if fairness is what we're really after, should gender matter at all?